Hey guys, this is a whistling tree frog, naturalised in New Zealand and from southern Australia. Now this little guy is about 8 months old and he's in a terrarium on his own. Now these frogs are nocturnal in nature, so generally they'll come out at night, they'll hunt at night, but you will see them throughout the day, and they're mainly arboreal, meaning they spend a lot of their time in trees, low shrub, around ponds, and small bodies of water. Now this is all I'm using, a glass jar. Nothing complex about it, a simple cookie jar that you can get from any hardware store. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a good clean out. So I just use fresh water, fresh lukewarm water, give it a good rinse out, make sure all the dust, make sure any dirt's out of it, so it's ready for use. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dry it out. So I just get a paper towel or just a hand rag, whatever you have on you, and just give it a good wipe out, just so it's nice and clean and clear so you can see what you're doing, and it's good for visibility purposes for you guys as well. Now we're going to add the substrate layer. For the substrate layer, I just added pebbles. So it's basically going to be the filtered zone, or basically it's going to be the false bottom. So it's going to be stones. The next layer is going to be soil with some activated charcoal. So this mix is basically charcoal, mulch, soil, and wood chips. I've mixed it all around to make sure I have a nice planting base that sits above the stones, as the stones will simply act as a false layer, like I said, to let the water drain through. Now charcoal is fantastic for preventing build-up of bad bacteria, as well as keeping it fairly odor-free as much as possible. And the soil is basically going to promote the vegetation to grow. Once I got both layers in there, I'm now going to use some aquascaping materials or toolkit. This is just some long tongs and tweezers, and just move things around, make sure everything's nice and flat so that everything can be spread out nicely and I can be ready for the next step. Alright, hardscape is next, but first I found an intruder. I found a larvae in here and I was thinking, what is this? But then I thought, you know what, great opportunity to give the baby green gecko something to eat. So let's check it out and see if he's interested. This is a New Zealand northern green gecko, and these are juveniles, and as you can see, I've placed it there for him, see how it goes. Back to the hardscape. So hardscape is basically your decorations, whether it's tree bark, cork bark. I like to use natural wood. I found this really cool I guess few bits of wood from the garden. I was able to cut it down and make sure it fits, make sure it looks all nice, perfect for tree frogs. They're going to have a bit of a variety of wood, so things they can climb, as well as some green vegetation, which we'll get to. But as you can see, I'm moving things around. This is the fun part, but also the very laborious trial and error aspect of any terrarium build, but super fun, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. The next part, guys, is I'm going to add 2 tiny pots. Now these are just ferns that don't need direct sunlight. They can be in indirect sunlight and they'll still flourish. So let's get these guys in there. I now need to make some space, and let's get these in here. Once again, a bit niggly with vegetation. You have to be careful because you have the roots that you need to be careful with. You have to plant it, make sure you cover all the roots, make sure they're not being drowned with the soil, and that basically moving them around to see how well everything looks. Do you have a good balance and it's not too obtrusive? As you can see, super fun once again, but can be a lot of trial and error and a lot of cleaning up I have to do afterwards. But once again, the enjoyment process and probably the funnest bit of any terrarium build. Now I had to do some landscaping, so I had to trim the tops of the ferns as they were sticking out of the enclosure lid. So I just did some trimming and we got it down to a reasonable height. Now the next part, because whistling tree frogs don't actually require a huge body of water, just regular misting to make sure the terrarium is nice and humid, and a little dish with some duckweed at the bottom just to give them a bit of pond stimulus. Pretty cute, but like I said, they don't need a whole lot of water, and these guys are tiny. The next part I like to do is I like to add leaf litter. Now leaf litter makes it look really natural. It just gives it a lot more stimulus for them to hide, so that whistling tree frogs can, if they like to be on the ground, on the soil, they have the leaf litter as an option to hide underneath. So I move it around, make sure I've got a good balance of leaf litter, soil, and their arboreal requirements. I now give everything a good mist and get some cotton buds in there and just wipe up any dirt and just get the edges all nice and clean. Now the tree frogs are not going to be the only little guys living in there. I collected a couple of isopods from the garden that I'll also add to the enclosure. Now, good thing about these guys is that they're quite large, so the whistling tree frogs can't eat them, and they don't eat frogs either. And what their job will be is just to eat dead vegetation and just add some more stimulus to the environment where they'll clean and they'll provide. Oh, and also the green gecko did get that worm in the end, fantastic. But back to these guys, they'll basically provide and clean the environment, kind of like a snail, and they'll add some more stimulus for the environment. Now look at these guys, the whistling tree frog. These are just come out of their tadpole phase. Now they are fully formed froglets and absolutely tiny. Look at the scale sitting next to the jar. Yep, that's him down there below. Can you believe it? Absolutely amazing animals. Let's have a closer look. Now I'm adding a total of 4 froglets into here, which is an absolute huge environment for them. As you can see, these guys are tiny and they're going to love this. They've got arboreal areas, they've got terrestrial areas, they've got areas with lots of dense jungle for them to climb through to hide. They'll feel safe. I'll have to feed them actively so they get enough food because it's such a large environment for them. But the reason I can't have them with the adults and even the juveniles, and that's simply because they're so small they will become food. Comparing to the 8-month-old, these guys are tiny, the size of my fingernail. So you can imagine that these guys need their own area, their own safe environment, and these guys are absolutely so cool. It's the only tree frog we get here in New Zealand, and ironically it is naturalized. You can keep them as pets and in captivity. But let's see the difference between the upgrade. They were in the jar on the left as they just came out of the tadpole phase, just to make sure they were eating, they were healthy, and now they're in this absolute lush jungle. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you just like and subscribe, it doesn't cost you anything, it just supports me and allows me to keep making this content for you guys. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next one.